Hi and welcome to this edition of Pressing Matters. Here's what's coming up next. Controlling the spread of invasive mussels in the state, why they pose such a threat to the overall health of our waters and our native species. Plus, new Canadian regulation targeting invasive species could leave some freighters out to dry. Then, the clock is ticking down to the November 5th general election. The issue is important to Central Michigan voters and how to make sure you're prepared before heading to the polls. Those stories next on Pressing Matters.
In terms of surveying for native freshwater mussels, that has been done before. And it's that idea that we really don't know what's in our inland lakes, and so let's go out and let's just start surveying them.
Efforts are underway to get a better understanding of what's in our inland waters before it's potentially too late. Hi and welcome back to this edition of Pressing Matters. It was in the 1980s when researchers first became aware of zebra and quagga mussels in our Great Lakes. Since their discovery, these invasive species have run rampant in the biggest bodies of water surrounding us, decimating some populations of native mussels and threatening the overall water ecology. Now, scientists want to learn about their presence in other bodies of water in Michigan, like lakes and streams, and raise awareness about just how destructive they can be and what you can do to help prevent them from spreading.
Prevention, because once they're established, they're there, and there's nothing we can do.
Michael Hillary with the Michigan Department of Natural Resources is working on a project that might be long overdue.
We have those plates out there right now looking at settlement of veligers, right? Or juvenile zebra mussels. They're settling, veligers settle on the plate and then the juvenile zebra mussels grow. As far as I'm aware, that's the first time this has been studied in Michigan inland lakes.
Hillary and his team are looking for any signs or presence of invasive mussels in our inland lakes. Here, they're diving in Lake Cadillac. Native freshwater mussels are critical for helping filter pollution out of the water and improve overall water quality. They also stir up vital nutrients from the bottom and providing additional food sources for fish and other aquatic animals. David Zanata, biologist with Central Michigan University, says the role native mussels play is critical.
Incredibly important for the overall biodiversity of the ecosystem. They show a clear pattern with water quality, high diversities of native mussels. And they also, unlike zebra mussels, because they burrow, they kind of cause a lot of nutrient cycling in the sediments themselves that zebra mussels don't really do because they don't burrow. So really important because it allows for carbon cycling and nutrient cycling to happen more readily in those river bottoms, and allows for more aeration of that bottom that otherwise wouldn't happen.
Zebra mussels spread very quickly into the Great Lakes in the late 80s with the rise of the shipping industry when they hitched a ride over from Eastern Europe. They're very small compared to several of our larger native freshwater mussels. Quagga mussels came a few years later, both capable of the same type of destruction.
They reproduce really quickly. Female can release over like 1 million veligers a spawning season, so a lot. They're broadcast spawners, and so they just free float, and they settle on the hard substrates, and then they have these byssal threads, which is just protein layer that they attach to things with, and they're quite strong, and so they've been a problem.
A zebra and quagga mussel typical lifespan is 2 to 3 years. The native mussels are relatively prolific as well and can produce tens of thousands of larvae during a season even. The native mussels have an extra step in their life cycle that requires the parasitism of a host fish. And sometimes that host is quite specific in what they use, and they use that host to move around, but that extra step complicates things and makes them less prolific overall.
Once native mussel larvae find a host fish, they'll eventually go through a type of transformation and burrow into the soft bottom of the water. Invasive mussels settle on hard surface, including native mussels, oftentimes right near the top, depriving them of food, among other things.
They will preferentially settle on that over other hard surfaces. With a load of a few dozen to a few hundred, sometimes even heavy densities of a few thousand, within a few months, the native mussel isn't able to move, might tip over because of the heavy load of zebra or quagga mussels on them. They're outcompeted for the food that is getting towards them, and they can't reproduce properly because their larvae are perhaps getting eaten or are getting disrupted. So they die out within a few months to a few years after a heavy zebra mussel infestation.
Both native and invasive mussels filter water, but without the native mussels stirring up the sea floor, having clear water can actually lead to more problems, including large algae blooms.
It's not really a positive thing. Aesthetically, it might look positive because the water might appear clearer, but a lot of the nutrients and potentially pollutants that were out in the water column are now down in the sediment, and that becomes much more toxic, changes the ecosystem dramatically for other bottom-dwelling organisms, fish, invertebrates, and that changes the food webs that are available to the native fauna that might have been previously present.
Managing and removing invasive species already costs millions annually, and without prevention and awareness, that price tag will likely keep going up.
And we're also spending millions of dollars a year trying to manage these, and clean out pipes and things like that. Cleaning off your boats, right? Clean, drain, dry. And so, cleaning off your boats when you're moving from different water bodies. That's because we still have inland lakes where we do not have invasive drycinids, so zebra mussels and quagga mussels. And that's important, from a freshwater native mussel perspective, is that's because they do pose a threat to them.
Now in Michigan, there are roughly 45 types of native mussel species. Researchers tell us not only are invasive species threatening the health of the Great Lakes and inland bodies of water, but climate change will also continue to play a role in the changing ecosystems. Now, just last month, a Canadian regulation targeting invasive species went into effect, but the new rule is blocking 6 U.S. carriers from accessing Canadian ports in the Great Lakes. The measure requires ships to install technology that filters water ships take on board, also known as ballast water, to account for changing cargo loads. Canadian officials say this will reduce the spread of invasive species. The 6 American ships built after 2008 are immediately affected by the law. Now, the president of the Lake Carriers Association says the 6 ships have applied for a 5-year exemption from the policy.
American ships that aren't impacted yet to move some of that cargo. But even if that is the case, it still impacts the economics of our fleet. I would call it a regulatory embargo.
A U.S. federal commission is currently investigating the Canadian rule for unfair trade practices. In a statement, Canada's Transportation Department told WCMU the law was, quote, non-discriminatory and in the public interest. Well, with just a few more days before the general election, voters have a lot on their minds. We all know that next Tuesday, our country will elect a new president of the United States. And across Michigan, officials are working to ensure voter safety while diligently protecting one of the most sacred rights as U.S. citizens. To talk more about the overall process and address concerns, we have Kyla Stepp and Andrea LaFontaine, both faculty members with Central Michigan University. Kyla and Andrea, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Now, you guys are both experienced in the political arena. Andrea, having been an elected official in the past, Kyla teaching law and politics here at CMU. Well, I'm curious, and Andrea, you of course also teach here. I'm curious, what are your conversations in the classroom like recently?
Sure, I'll go first. It's really exciting. It's like the buzz is like palpable. Students seem super, super engaged, which I love. Mm-hmm. We always love when students are engaged in the classroom, but even more so during an election year.
Sure. How about you, Kyla?
Yeah, the same. I mean, the students really are paying attention. They're asking questions every day. Did you see this in the news? Did you see that? I've had students flat out ask me, how do I register to vote, right? Am I registered back at home with my parents, or can I register to vote here in Michigan?
Yeah.
Being as Michigan such an important swing state, some of them are not from important swing states.
Yeah.
So yes, having these conversations on a daily basis with students has been great.
And what do you think, what are some of their top concerns and issues, going into this election cycle?
I mean, I think that they share a lot of the same concerns that people their age have all over the country, at least from what I have seen. Issues about, certainly the economy, right? Inflation, the same type of issues we see everyone concerned with, but also issues surrounding reproductive rights. Climate change certainly is something that seems to come up quite often. Gun control, they're acutely aware of everything going on. School shootings, so many of them. Some of them had school shootings or were adjacent to school shootings where they went to high school, and so that comes up quite often.
Yeah.
So those are the types of issues that they ask me about and we talk about most often, at least that I've seen.
In class last week, we went through and I asked them to rank their primary and secondary issues that motivate them to get out and vote. And it was all the ones that Dr. Stepp just listed, abortion, basic human rights. They brought up integrity and respect just as characteristics of candidates, which I thought was really, really important.
Absolutely. So then bigger picture, from the classroom to kind of statewide, you mentioned Michigan being a battleground state. We always seem to be, and why is that? Why is Michigan always considered to be a battleground state?
I think because we pay attention, we're constantly evolving. We have smart voters here who are like, every single election matters and counts. And I personally think it's great. I love when candidates come here and pay attention to Michigan. And I always say, Michigan matters. We are here. People want our votes, and they're going to work for them.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. And in Michigan, we are seeing those candidates making those stops here almost daily. Well, going back to integrity, after the 2020 election, we heard obviously a lot about the integrity of the election process. So what kind of steps are being taken now to ensure every vote is counted and every vote is legal?
I mean, I would say honestly the same steps as happened before, perhaps now with a bit more transparency so that hopefully people understand the process. Especially here in Michigan, it's always been a very safe process. We have passed laws in recent years that help open up the ability of people to vote. We now have early voting. We have same-day registration for people who need it. We have new rules now about poll watchers and things like that. So I think maybe helping people be more aware. So an awareness campaign certainly I've seen that. And that should hopefully help educate people that it is a safe, secure process.
You mentioned for someone who is not registered to vote and they go to their local polling station, can they still cast a ballot, or will it be denied?
So they can do a couple of things. First, they should be directed to their local township clerk where they can register. Okay. You can't register at the polling location unless the polling location happens to be at the same place as the township clerk's office. But typically, the clerk's office will be open all day. You can go there, you can register to vote, and then you can cast a ballot while you're there as well.
Okay.
It's technically an absentee ballot, but it works the same way. So yes, you can register right up until 8 p.m. when the polls close. You can register the same day. It does make it a little trickier. There'll probably be lines. But yes, you can register the same day.
Right, because I believe the deadline to be a registered voter had passed already. Is that right?
You mean to be able to get an absentee ballot? Yes. So there are deadlines in place for how early you have to request an absentee ballot, that sort of thing. But in order to vote in person, you can go right up to the day.
Got it. Okay, good to know. What do you need to have with you before you cast your ballot?
So you have to have, there are basic requirements, right? ID with you. You need to know where you're going probably. And then I always say you also have to have your plan to vote, right? Because you want to have some sort of basic understanding of what's on the ballot and what would be most helpful. But definitely having that ID and knowing where you're going. You don't have to have your voter registration card. They can look all that up in their system when you get there. If you do want to bring it with you, it is helpful, but.
Can you look up a ballot before you go to vote?
Yes, you can.
And where do you go?
Secretary of State's website, or just Google how to find my ballot near me. They might direct you to your local county clerk's website, and you can pull it up there. You put your address in, and then it'll give you your sample ballot for that election cycle.
Got it. Okay, now for someone who technically cannot vote, what happens when someone's vote is challenged?
So if someone's vote's challenged, first of all, there's very specific rules on who can challenge and for what reasons they can challenge. So typically it has to be, they have to challenge the person's identification or the fact that they haven't, someone could challenge, oh, you already voted absentee, so you can't show up in person and vote as well. But you can't challenge for not being able to speak English, for example, or for kind of looking suspicious, or there's lots and lots of reasons why you can't challenge. There's also rules in place against voter intimidation. Also, the challengers can't directly interact with the voters at all. They have to tell the supervisor on site, who then has to deal with the challenge. A worst case scenario, while the challenge is being played out, if they can't figure out the details right then and there, the person can cast a provisional ballot, which will then be just as legal as a normal ballot. Once everything is sorted out later, the person can provide their ID, right, or whatever the issue is. So most times the challenge is resolved right then. The person can still vote. If not, a provisional ballot is provided that will be counted later if they can provide that information within 6 days.
Okay. In Michigan, and I imagine in a few other states, a few candidates are going to appear on the ballot, but they're no longer running. For example, Robert Kennedy. How does someone navigate that?
Do you want to talk about like the legalese side of that? Because there was recently like a court case.
Okay, yeah, sure. Certainly people can still, they can vote for anyone on the ballot, they can write people in. So legally it would still be a vote cast. It's more of the kind of the philosophical, if someone is not officially running, even if you got the most votes, it would not matter. So it's, yes, it's more of a what effect it might have on the race as opposed to, I think, the legal aspects of it.
I think that's also why you see those candidates throwing their endorsements out there for other candidates, trying to persuade voters like, hey, don't cast your vote for me, cast them for this person instead. But the name is still on there. So
Yeah, absolutely. All right, you mentioned a little bit about voter intimidation, but let's talk a little bit about voter etiquette. We live in a very selfie world, right? But when you're at the polls, can you post a photo of you and your ballot on social media?
No.
No.
No, don't do it. No selfies allowed. The only thing you can do is take a photo of your ballot, the ballot itself, in the polling booth itself, but you can't post it until you're at least 100 feet outside of the polling place. So it's the same kind of electioneering rules apply to that as if you were going to wear a candidate's name on your shirt or something like that, a campaign for someone. So you can't, your face can't be in there with the ballot. You certainly can't take photos of other people, other people's ballots. Even the election challengers can't take photos of anything. Technically, you're not even supposed to use your cell phone while you're in the ballot box, the booth, other than to take a photo of your ballot without you in it.
Got it. Well, that was going to be, you already answered all of my questions. No, you cannot post photos of other people at the polls, and no, you should not be on your phone while casting your ballot.
And I really think it's for the voters' best interest as well, right? It's protecting that integrity and the secrecy of the ballot and the decorum of the polling place. So.
And to help with potential voter intimidation and things like that, right?
Speaking of, if someone feels threatened or intimidated, what are their options?
Well, they should tell whoever the supervisor at that site is, right? The kind of the head person there. They actually have training for how and when to contact law enforcement if it comes to that point. So in law enforcement, local law enforcement will have training as well, how to deal with voter intimidation or threats at the polling place. So there is a system in place. You just need to make sure that you tell the supervisor on site if you feel threatened at all or intimidated.
Sure. This year, like any other election, we have a lot of first-time voters. What kind of what advice do you have for someone who just turned 18 and is going to vote in this election?
I would say do your homework in advance, know your plan, really look at your ballot because there might be some things on there that maybe you weren't thinking about, and there are always names, and know that you don't have to fill in every part of your ballot if you feel uncomfortable, but really making that plan, knowing before you go kind of what you're going to do when you get there. And if anything feels off, like there are people, poll workers are trained and there are supervisors on site to help navigate through all that. There's everything that you need to know is also posted outside of the polling location too, so you can get a feel while you're there.
All right. Yeah. We're going to go back to this. We talked a little bit about it earlier, but what's the difference between early voting, absentee voting, and mail-in voting?
So early voting is relatively new, and this opens up in-person voting for a period of time, at least 9 days, it can be more potentially, before Election Day. So it allows people who have to work on Election Day or who otherwise can't vote on that day, maybe people who missed the deadline to get their absentee ballot, it allows them to still show up and vote in person, and just have to do it at their local clerk's office. There are certain rules about how often they have to be open and that sort of thing. So that's just showing up in person and voting. Or an absentee ballot, you get it in the mail, you fill it out, you can either mail it back, you can put it in a ballot drop box, or you can take it in person to your clerk's office and they'll stick it in the machine just like they would if they got it from the mail. So yeah, all different ways to be able to vote if you can't show up at the polls on Election Day. Super helpful for people who either have to work that day or don't want to wait in long lines.
Yeah, absolutely. And then how were all those votes counted?
They are counted typically through a tabulator is how it works. So if you do early in-person voting, you can go and it's as if it's what's happening same like on Election Day, right? You go to your early in-person voting site, which isn't always your typical poll location, so you want to look that up before you go. And then you fill out your ballot and you actually can put it into the tabulator that day. If you're voting absentee, those absentee ballots then get collected by the clerk's office, and they may have an AV counting board where they're tabulating them at the same time, but all votes are usually tabulated through the tabulator that's on site.
All right. What role do elected state officials play in ensuring free and fair elections?
I think that's a great question. I think we have some previous pretty high-ranking officials from Michigan who are out there really working hard to promote the integrity and fairness of elections and really making sure that Michigan has a great track record and our clerks do a phenomenal job. I think Michigan may lead the nation as we have over 1,600 county and local clerks, so the most decentralized voting system in the nation. So all of those people are armed and equipped and they know the specifics of Election Day, which is really, really great. And all those people are really fighting to make sure people's votes are counted and that people feel safe when they're voting. And really just to make sure, bring all that integrity to the election process.
Definitely. Now, if someone wants to volunteer at a precinct on Election Day, is that possible? And how might they go about it?
So there's a couple different ways depending on what role you want to play.
Yeah.
So if you want to be a poll worker, right, people who interact with the public, help voters figure out how to vote, where to vote, all of that, those are actually paid positions, and so you can apply for those. There's a central website that you can find through the Secretary of State or the Michigan Voter Information Center that you can apply for those positions. You have to pick a party affiliation. Doesn't mean you're registered under that affiliation. It's just so they can make sure that there are kind of equal numbers of both, if possible. There are also ways to potentially volunteer, but usually that's on behalf of a political party or an interest group, either someone who's an official challenger there to make challenges, or kind of an informal poll watcher. To do that, any member of the public is welcome to do that as long as there's room. You can go, you can watch, you can't interact, you can't officially make challenges, you can't take photos, as we already talked about, or videos, that sort of thing. So there's a variety of ways to do that, but why not get the paid poll worker position? I know they're always looking for more people. So that's perhaps the best way to be involved.
Got it. All right. Well, Kyla Stepp, Andrea LaFontaine, thank you both for being here and sharing your knowledge and expertise with us. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
And again, to reiterate, most polls will be open 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. on Tuesday, November 5th. Thanks for watching.